Imagine this for a second. You're in your mid-40 seconds. It's a quiet weekday evening. You're sitting at your kitchen table in a house you worked decades for. There's a glass of wine next to you, the kind you only pour when you feel like you've finally done something right. In front of you is a check, $42,000, every last dollar you had set aside, emergency fund, a small inheritance. Years of discipline condensed into one signature. You mail it to the bank, close the envelope, and for the first time in a long time, you breathe deeply. The house is paid off. No mortgage, no debt, just relief. You sleep that night believing you made the safest, smartest, most responsible financial decision of your life. And if that sounds like you, let me be very clear. You didn't do anything stupid. You did exactly what generations before you were taught to do. But this conversation is not for everyone. If your income is unstable, if you don't have savings, if debt already controls your life, this isn't advice to copy blindly. But if you're disciplined, thoughtful, and still lying awake at night, wondering why doing everything right doesn't feel safe, stay with me. Because the real danger isn't debt. It's what happens after you think you're finally safe. 6 months later, something shifts. It always does. The economy cools. Your industry tightens. One Tuesday morning, the job you thought was solid is gone. No paycheck, no warning, just silence. You open your bank app and your balance stares back at you like a bad joke. Almost nothing. Because all that liquidity you once had, you sent it to the bank. You traded cash for comfort. Groceries still need to be bought. The electric bill doesn't care about your paid-off house. Your car doesn't run on good intentions. And that's when you look around. $500,000 of equity is sitting in these walls. And suddenly you realize something no one warned you about. You can't eat drywall. You can't pay a mechanic with a brick. So you do what seems logical. You walk into the bank and ask for a home equity line of credit. And they smile politely and say no. No income, no loan. Banks only lend money to people who don't need it. And right there, inside a house that's fully paid off, you feel smaller, weaker, and more trapped than you ever did with a mortgage. This is the moment when safety reveals its real price. What happened here isn't bad luck, and it certainly isn't stupidity. It's a trap. A very common one. I call it the liquidity trap. You didn't lose money. You didn't overspend. You did something far more subtle. You locked your options away. When you pushed extra principal into that mortgage, the money didn't disappear. It just stopped working for you. Equity feels like wealth, but equity is silent. It doesn't show up when you need it most. It doesn't pay your bills. It doesn't buy you time. And time, in a crisis, is everything. This isn't about being irresponsible or reckless with debt. It's about understanding that financial risk isn't owing money. Financial risk is not having access to money. That distinction changes everything. Once you see it, you start to realize the problem was never the mortgage. The problem was believing that eliminating it made you safe. Now, this is where most people get uncomfortable, because this is where emotion has to step aside and math takes the wheel. Paying off your mortgage early feels productive, but financially, it's nothing more than choosing a very low-yield investment and locking it up forever. If your mortgage rate is 3, 4, maybe even 5%, every extra dollar you send to the bank is earning exactly that. No more, no less. That's the return. Now ask yourself something honestly. Would you voluntarily put your life savings into a savings account that pays 3% and punishes you for touching it? Of course not. You'd call that a terrible deal. And yet, that's exactly what early mortgage payoff is. Meanwhile, that same money could sit in a money market fund earning 5% today, or in a diversified S&P 500 index fund that historically returns 8 to 10% over long periods. When you choose to pay off the mortgage instead of investing, you're not being conservative. You're choosing a lower return because debt makes you uncomfortable. That difference is a fear tax. Banks understand this perfectly. They borrow money from you at low rates and lend it back at higher ones. They keep the spread. That spread is profit. You can do the same thing in reverse. If your mortgage costs 4% and your investments earn 8%, the 4% gap belongs to you. That's arbitrage. That's leverage doing its job. Kill the mortgage early, and you kill the arbitrage. You fire your most productive employee and volunteer to do all the work yourself. And over decades, that decision doesn't cost you thousands. It costs you hundreds of thousands, sometimes more. This is where the math gets even more uncomfortable, because inflation quietly flips the entire story upside down. Inflation is brutal if you're a saver, but it is incredibly generous if you're a disciplined borrower. When you take out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, you lock your housing cost in place while the dollar slowly decays. The payment doesn't change, but the value of the money you use to pay it absolutely does. Today, a $2,000 mortgage might feel heavy. It might take up a big chunk of your income. But fast forward 15 or 20 years, with normal inflation, that same $2,000 feels smaller, lighter, almost harmless. Your income rises, your skills compound. You're paying yesterday's debt with tomorrow's cheaper dollars. And here's the part most people miss. The bank loses in this scenario. They lent you strong dollars and get repaid in weaker ones. By paying off your mortgage early, you reverse that advantage. You hand the bank valuable dollars today, instead of forcing them to accept discounted dollars later. That's not responsibility. That's generosity. The mortgage gets cheaper every single year without you doing anything. Time is working for you. And when you rush to eliminate that debt, you're not reducing risk. You're destroying one of the most powerful forces quietly helping you win. Now listen carefully, because this is where people get it wrong and hurt themselves. Keeping a mortgage is not the same thing as being reckless. It only works under very specific conditions. This isn't a permission slip to live on the edge. It's a framework. First, you must have liquidity, real liquidity, cash or near cash that can cover at least 12 months of living expenses. Not credit cards, not home equity, money you can touch tomorrow if life falls apart. Second, your investing has to be boring and automatic, long-term, diversified, and emotionally boring enough that you don't panic when the market shakes. If you're checking your account every day, you're not ready. And third, the money you invest, instead of prepaying the mortgage, cannot be money you'll need next year or the year after. This only works when patience is part of the plan. Without these rules, leverage becomes danger. With them, leverage becomes protection. This is not about being brave. It's about being prepared. And preparation is what separates intelligent risk from financial suicide. So let's stop pretending everything goes according to plan. Because it doesn't. Imagine the market goes nowhere for years. Not a crash, just stagnation. Imagine you lose your job, and it takes a year, maybe longer, to replace that income. This is the scenario people are actually afraid of, even if they don't say it out loud. Now look at the two paths side by side. One person rushed to pay off the house and sits there with no mortgage and no cash. The other kept the mortgage and quietly built a large, liquid investment account. When the paycheck disappears, who has choices? The person with cash can sell assets slowly, strategically, on their terms. They can pay the mortgage for years if needed. They buy time. The person with the paid-off house has a roof, yes, but no engine. Property taxes still come due. Insurance still has to be paid. And a house cannot write checks for you. In real crises, survival doesn't belong to the person who eliminated debt first. It belongs to the person who preserved options. This is where the entire conversation needs to be reframed. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that freedom meant zero debt, a clean balance sheet, and nothing owed to anyone. But freedom isn't the absence of obligations. Freedom is the presence of options. A mortgage doesn't take your freedom away. Panic does. Illiquidity does. When all your wealth is locked inside one immovable asset, you haven't simplified your life. You've narrowed it. Zero debt with zero liquidity is not strength. It's fragility disguised as virtue. Real financial independence is when your assets can quietly handle your liabilities without asking permission from anyone. When your investments can cover your mortgage, you are mathematically debt-free while staying in control of the capital. That's the difference between owning a trophy and commanding an army. One looks impressive, the other keeps you alive. So here's what I want you to do next. And no, this is not a leap of faith. It's an experiment. For the next 6 to 12 months, stop sending extra principal to the mortgage company. Just pause. Take that same $200, $500, or $1,000 a month and route it into a separate brokerage account. Name it something intentional. Call it your Freedom Fund. Invest it automatically into a broad, low-cost S&P 500 index fund or a conservative mix that lets you sleep at night. Then don't touch it. Don't optimize it. Don't overthink it. Just watch. At the end of that period, compare two numbers, the balance of that account versus the interest you would have saved by prepaying the mortgage. Let the math speak instead of your emotions. And here's the part that matters most. If something breaks tomorrow, if life throws a curveball, that money is there for you. The check you mailed to the bank last month is gone forever. I've watched people chase peace of mind their entire lives, and most of them never realize how expensive it is. A paid-off house looks impressive. It feels responsible. It earns applause at dinner tables. But security doesn't come from trophies. It comes from resilience. When you optimize your financial life around eliminating debt instead of preserving liquidity, you're solving the wrong problem. The goal was never to impress a credit report. The goal was to survive uncertainty with dignity. Cash gives you time. Liquidity gives you choices. Choices give you freedom. A house without a mortgage is a nice place to live. A strong investment portfolio is what keeps you calm when the world shakes. So don't ask yourself whether debt is good or bad. Ask a better question. If everything went wrong tomorrow, how long could I stand on my own 2 feet? I'd rather have an army than a trophy. And once you see that difference, you'll never think about money the same way again.